The topic of sustainability in the tourism industry is timely, as destinations and travelers increasingly value economic, social, and environmental sustainability. It is imperative that tourism professionals and policymakers share best practices to position the tourism industry for further growth and development. The Victoria Business Examiner wrote that in 2018, they were talking about the inaugural Impact Sustainability Travel and Tourism Conference. One of the three founding partners, one of the men behind the genesis of that important conference, was my friend Paul Nursey. No stranger to a challenge, Paul set out to develop the first conference of its kind. It would include representation from across the country and also from all industries and organizations working in collaboration to guide the development of a more sustainable and more restorative tourism industry. 3 years later, the conference is an ongoing, smashing success. But this year, the concept of sustainability has taken on a whole new context in the shadow of the global pandemic that we have faced since early March. Paul is the former Director of Sales at Tourism Vancouver, the former VP Strategy at Destination Canada, and the current CEO of Destination Greater Victoria. He's a bright light in the industry, a passionate thinker, and a person who gets things done. Today, we sit down to talk about the new meaning of sustainability in an industry ravaged by crisis. Make no mistake, there is a light at the end of the tunnel, but we're going to have to work for it. Good morning, Paul.
Hey, good morning, David. How are you?
I'm good. How are you, sir?
I'm doing pretty well, thanks. All things considered, I'm doing well.
Good. Where are you and what's it like there right now?
I'm in my office. Our office is reopened on a limited basis in Victoria downtown, and it's nice and sunny. We just came off of Canada today with about 20% hotel occupancy, which is normally we're 90 plus, so it's a very different feel around here.
A very different feel indeed. I want to really focus on one area of what you do. And I admire what you do in so many different areas of tourism. You and I have known each other for a number of years. Your work on marketing, your work on strategy. But today I want to talk about sustainability because I think you've really opened a dialogue on sustainability. But I think most of us in the world still think of sustainability in terms of its ecological component. Tell us a little bit about the genesis of the conference itself, and then we can talk more about how we have to broaden our perspective on sustainability.
Sure, absolutely, David. And I just want to say that I don't consider myself an expert in sustainability or sustainability in tourism, but it was something I was kind of forced into. When I arrived here in Victoria, it's a very unique place, as many of our destinations are. And it kind of gets right into Jack Johnson talks about being a shared community value, that you have to be aligned with the values of the community that you serve. And what I learned here when in landing in 2014 is that there's a business community here and also a citizenry, I guess you would call it. The citizens expect sustainability. It was largely framed through environmental sustainability, but Indigenous rights and Indigenous participation has become increasingly important, and as has equity and social justice. So really what it comes down to is the visitor economy really serving the community? Is tourism as we know it, or the meeting sector, actually driving the benefit to the whole and not just a few? And how can we create a framework so that our industry is welcomed as part of a contributing fabric of the society year round? And so that was a gap in 2014, 2015. We had areas of conflict. We had, for example, we had a cruise sector which was supported by very old motor coaches because motor coaches could only operate a few months of the year and there wasn't a business model and all that type of stuff. And it caused a lot of tension. So what we struck out to do was to kind of take some of those academic ideas around sustainability and bring them to the street level. And that's a hard thing to do. And that was the original genesis. And it took me a few years to get into that.
So that's a really interesting point you make. When you land in Victoria in 2014, you call yourself not an expert in sustainability, but I call you an autodidactic who can learn just about anything as quick as anybody I know. it's interesting to land in Victoria because all those forces that you talked about, a pressure from the community to be sustainable, especially to be environmentally sustainable, that is endemic to Victoria. And I don't think at the same time in 2014, the rest of the country was thinking along those same lines, were they?
Not in a mainstream fashion. And what was where I drew inspiration from was the small businesses community here and our members. And they were already doing it as a matter of principle, and it was just the ethos. And it took me about 6 months. And also our business partners. And I have three business partners in the Impact Sustainability Tourism Conference, and they were practicing that way, whether they were a marketing communications agency or a carbon accountant or consultancies or even an event planner, and they were already behaving in that manner. So I knew as a DMO that we were out of touch, and I was sitting here in my seat going, "Holy cow! I see the freight train of regulation coming our way. In a year, 2, 3 years, and stuff's going to be imposed upon us if we don't take control of this agenda ourselves from an industry-driven perspective and make it really collaborative." So we really were facing pressure, and I think we created something quite special.
You created something quite special in response to the situation you found yourself in Victoria. When did it become apparent to you that Victoria was really just the canary in the mine shaft, and that the rest of us in North America, in the world, needed to face this more head on and actually make it part of our strategic planning, not just on a environmental, but on a social and economic level as well?
Absolutely. So I think there was two or three different things that were happening. Let's call it 2015, 2016, 2017. We started hearing more and more about climate emergencies and governments declaring climate emergencies. We started hearing more and more about governments looking at taking legal action against carbon producers. And concurrently, we heard more and more about the percentage of contribution of carbon of our industry, particularly the transportation sector. And then you wonder about, what is our long-term social license? So that was happening on one track. Then we started hearing on another track this whole idea about, and Greg Oates speaks a lot about this, kind of the equity and the division of the revenue equitably among a community. So that was bubbling as well too. And you started seeing it popping up all around the world as we went through this period of intense growth. You started hearing words like over tourism, and then that started talking about carrying capacity, and everything kind of spilt from there. And our industry became a very easy target. But we knew we were well intentioned. We just didn't know how to translate it, execute, and then tell that story and keep learning.
It's really interesting because if you look at your progression over the last 6 years, basically, and you look at the parallel progressions in 5 key areas of tourism development, and you referenced Jack Johnson and Greg Oates. So let me run down those. Advocacy has come to the forefront as an essential component of what a destination organization needs to do. Stakeholder engagement is irrefutably a key tenet of DMOs. Digital excellence, we've all realized that we are nowhere near as excellent in that technology as the technology presents its capabilities to us as. Destination development and alignment. I'm going to put to you, I see those 5 things as a Venn diagram with an overlap in the middle. And I'm starting to think that the word in the middle that fits is sustainability.
Yeah, I agree. Sustainability or community engagement. And I think they're interchangeable because based on the values of the community, I learned very quickly that I certainly didn't want our organization to be part of just a fringe of business people that wanted to kind of profit off of the back of the community, right? We need broad community acceptance. We need broad community support. And that's what our members wanted too. And it's up to the DMO to coalesce that. And so I think you're right. And I think what was lacking was our ability to create a framework around it and how to action it. So that's the work that we've been starting to do over the last 3 or 4 years. And it's still a work in progress. And I think other destinations are doing better than Victoria. But I think it's a journey. And I think if you're legitimately and genuinely on that journey as a servant leader, I think most people will take that walk with you.
So when you started that inaugural conference, was it more weighted to environmental sustainability? That was how it pricked up our ears in the industry. We heard sustainability, we had preconceived notions. Did it move from that to a broader context? Talk about its progression over the last 3 years.
Yeah, it absolutely did. It was a very green conference to start. And then I think what we really got into was social, specifically with the influence of Keith Henry and Indigenous Tourism Canada. And he's a tremendous leader in our space. And then we got into really kind of cool stuff like operations and how it is actually a good business proposition. And what I really like about that conference and the learnings that have come from it, the Impact Sustainable Tourism Conference, that we weren't afraid to tackle the difficult issues. such as having discussions around crews and how But we also had some of the most inspiring discussions around our youth panel, and basically woke us all up and said, "We're your future employers. We're your future customers. Listen to us." So it was a real sense of urgency, and it wasn't just kind of technical green sustainability, which I'm really happy with. But it has been an evolution, and what we really want to focus on is practical takeaways, and that's why we publish a paper every year afterwards. So it certainly has a more broad component to it, and it's been a fascinating journey so far.
So you talked about Greg Oates. Greg was on an earlier show, and he held up as a model of alignment the work that you and your organization and your peers and Mayor Helps has been doing as a best practice on the continent for taking the civic priorities and the tourism priorities and bringing them together in a way that residents could embrace and understand them. Talk about your work with the civic body there for a second.
Yeah, so thanks, David. And Greg is right. I mean, I think what we've had to realize is that, Victoria as a city is evolving. We used to be kind of an old England, kind of a ticky-tacky tourist town, but now we're very much a tech and particularly a marine tech community. We're on an ocean, we have a big port, and we're really focusing our meeting strategy around the ocean marine sector and the technology sectors. That's really easy to create alignment, and we do have a very dynamic mayor who now understands tourism. She only viewed tourism when I think she first got into office as kind of through that lens of mass tourism. She didn't understand lines like, business events and meetings. She didn't understand the work that we do in terms of seasonality and filling in those gaps and focusing on those high yield segments that create that brand halo. So we started aligning our brand and our messaging and our sales proposition to the civic priorities the synergies developed. And now I won't say there aren't tensions. There are still kind of more folks on the city council who are a bit more extreme in their views. But I think it's a matter of destination organizations of listening. We can't just impose ourselves on the community. We have to listen to what the priorities are. And in the broad suite of tools that we have, how can we create those wins that benefit our government partners and also our commercial partners, our hotels, our members, and everything else like that. And there's lots of space to create that common ground.
You talk about the organization serving the destination, but I also want to talk a little bit about how DMMOs or destination organizations or whatever we want to call them in this day and age can actually be leaders and harbingers of change. Yeah. I've watched brand aligned halo type work come out of Victoria consistently. Yeah. The exciting one for me was the first commercial electric airplane flight.
Yeah. We so our seaplane company, Harbour Air, which is a Victoria Vancouver company, is pioneering electric flight, and it's almost like a new generation of aviation, and that's innovation that's driven here in our part of the world, along with a Seattle-based engine company. We have the world's largest. It's only six locations, but it's a completely carbon neutral and waste-free fast food burger chain. It's called Big Wheel Burger, and it's fantastic. If anyone ever comes to town, I'll take them there. It's amazing food, and you wouldn't even know that it's completely green, but it is. And that's just how we roll here in Greater Victoria. So if our brand and our proposition and our positioning isn't about that, then when the visitors arrive, they're going to get a different experience. And we're really proud of that, right? So, yeah.
Oh, and you should be. So, Amir Elon from Longwoods International. Amir was talking on the show about the halo effect and the early work they did in Michigan, and how integral the tourism brand media was to convincing people that Michigan was a great place to live. It's almost like Victoria's gone one step further, and it's if you follow Victoria's brand and its brand really does reflect the destination well, then you're likely to show up wanting an electric airplane ride, aren't you?
We are. Unfortunately, there's only one, and it's not certified yet. But we do have a lot of electric vehicles. But I think what we try to do, without being preachy about it, is that you can learn something here, and whether that be in the meetings and convention space or in your own way of life. Our hotels are all practicing these types of practices, and our food sector our whale watchers are all about learning and science. So it's just something that we've embraced. We have a sustainability committee. It's a very basic thing, but we all get together about how we're marching together towards achieving those goals. And that's the role of the DMO or the DO, is to kind of mobilize your community and to march towards a common objective. And that's what we're trying to do.
Well, and on that halo effect piece, it's not just, the tourist says, oh, I like sustainable destinations. It is actually inviting an immigrant who's looking for that style of life to come here and find that style of life and contribute to it, isn't it?
Yeah, immigrant, foreign direct investment, business relocation, that whole piece is there. Also surprisingly, it really helps with sports bids as well too. These sports organizations are very concerned about their reputation, and it's very, very helpful in the meetings and convention space.
So when we talk about sustainability, sometimes there's a little gasp as the air goes out of the room, and people think, "Oh my gosh, this is my product plus 20% of costs. It's going to be hard, etc." But I want to go back to the early days. When you came into Tourism Vic, you brought in a balanced scorecard approach.
Okay, yeah.
And then you decided that your focus in increasing occupancy would be central. So I think in 2018 you've grown by more than 10% from 2014 in your key season. But then you also worked on shoulder seasons, and I mean that's an obvious in tourism. But I imagine before you put to work on it, you built alignment around those as goals. Talk to me about that.
Yeah, and that's what they asked me to when I started as CEO, right? So I think the reason I was hired is I was a balanced scorecard guy. I understood what strategy was and how to translate strategy. So at our first retreat, we talked about how do we grow but also be sustainable. I think the obvious point of that is to spread across seasons. And then as we got fuller and fuller, and that's not a problem these days, but hopefully it will be again in a few years, regional dispersion as well too throughout the region. So visitors will go to kind of less trafficked areas as they were in the past. So we just found that as we actually embraced what we call RevPAR strategy. It was about revenue over just mass tourism, increasing yield. And that's not rocket science. Many destinations have done that, but we started that in 14. But to achieve that, we needed a premium brand built around core principles that someone could believe in, and sustainability is part of it, as is technology, and then leverage that as part of our proposition in all channels.
So we have a Victoria that between 14 and 20 has grown really well in terms of not just its performance, but its perception in the world as a leader in sustainability, in sustainability, not just in green tech and environmental sustainability, but social and economic. You get whammed with this crisis. I mean, I think if I'm not mistaken, you'd only just finished the conference, and it was 2 or 3 weeks later that COVID-19 hit.
Yeah, but so the conference was ended in January, so I guess maybe about 6 weeks later. It wasn't long. Yeah.
So you go from an admirable position in the whole strata of Canadian tourism to being really severely hobbled, and maybe hobbled even more than other destinations, because let's not forget you are an offshore island, and that has a whole bunch of other implications. So in that world where you're thinking like Paul Nursey, and you're also thinking in terms of you've got your sustainability hat on, what happened? What did sustainability mean to you? Did it shift? Was it the same thing with different focus? Talk to me about that a little bit.
Yeah, so we've gotten back together, our committees and our board, and I think we understand that we have an opportunity to build back better. I think the other thing, our geographic situation, we are on an island, and we're a secondary city, so most of our air routes are cut, our ferry services were cut. So we actually know that we're in for a very long haul here. We're cut down to the bone, and we're going to have to grow back organically. So it's going to be a long slog here. So we have the opportunity to build back deliberately, but what won't be there was all the frothy revenue that was there, because these sustainability initiatives, like really expensive electric motor coaches and retrofits of hotels and attractions, that takes revenue, that takes capex, right? That's a big investment by the private sector. So those are discussions that we have to have with our government partners in the months and years ahead. Is if we want to achieve these common objectives, the funding model is going to have to be flexible, because for the last 3 or 4 years, we've been able to afford it based on executing a strategy. Because when we were a 4-month-a-year destination, we become a 10-month-a-year destination. motor coach companies can afford that fancy new electric bus, but now they can't. And so, in fact, they're struggling to stay alive. So those are the types of realization that we have to come to. The objectives will stay the same. The pathway may have to evolve.
So the 2021 Impact Sustainability Conference is already on the books. It's ready to go. I imagine you will be tweaking that agenda right to the end. What do you think will be different this year? I mean, we've got people coming from all over the United States and Canada, some from around the world. It's going to be a very different conference, isn't it?
It is going to be a very different conference. So we have the dates booked. We're not sure if we're actually allowed to have a convention yet because there's rules of 50 or more. So maybe virtual and maybe a hybrid. But certainly by 2022, we hope to have the full thing going ahead. We are planning on it right now, and I think the key word that we're all hearing about is resiliency. That is the key thing that we have to build into our whole system is resiliency, and then more aspirationally down the line, regeneration. What are we doing to contribute to get back so that we actually leave our environment and our society better than we found it? And we have taken a pause here, and there is an opportunity to think about these types of things.
So expand on that word resiliency. It gets tossed around a lot. It has different meanings to different people, but in the context of destination management and sustainable tourism practices, how would you define resiliency?
Well, maybe I won't define it, maybe describe. And so to me, resiliency means that a business and an ecosystem of businesses and an ecosystem of not-for-profit societies such as ours, which really firms up the ecosystem of tourism, has a more interwoven fiber. It's tighter so that it's harder to fray apart. So what we do, we need to be more deliberate to link all the different pieces together, to link them together, to understand everyone's role, what our common objectives are, back to balanced scorecard, what are those key KPIs. And right now, for the next month or two, our KPIs are not going bankrupt, right? That's what we're facing immediately. But as we get through this and as we build back up, how can we be stronger so that something like this doesn't blow us apart again in the future?
So you and I think we share a friend, Signe Jungerstad.
Yeah.
Jungerstad from Copenhagen. I think you and I were there 2017 when she talked about localhood. That was the new word she coined, localhood. And it was Copenhagen's response to the fact that they were seeing a disconnect between visitors and locals. But when they actually researched them, what they found out was their priorities and their values were actually highly aligned. It was a perception.
That's right.
So what's the perception by the local in Victoria of the traveler, of the incoming traveler?
So that's the work that we need to do, because what I'm trying to do is make sure that the locals benefit. So when someone gets off a cruise ship, and we are Canada's largest port cruise of call, I want to make sure they're going to the locals farmer market and purchasing there. So we still need to move away from what I would call mass tourism into more of niche tourism on the leisure side. So I think there still is a disconnect, and we need to work over the next couple of years to bring those two values together. But a good place to start is that we do have about 98% support of the industry because people understand its contribution. I think they would like to see it evolve a bit further, but we are already on that path. And I think our residents and our elected officials do see that. But I think we need to accelerate that journey.
So I'm gonna make you put an old hat on for a minute here. You're back at the CTC, and what was that?
The Canadian Tourism Commission, yeah.
Sorry, did I just call it? Sorry, I meant to call it Destination Canada.
It's all good.
I'm betraying my age. Sorry. Yes, Paul is correct. It's the Canadian Tourism Commission became Destination Canada. But I think when you were there, it was the CTC. Yes?
It was, yeah, it was, yeah.
So as we look towards recovery, and you talked specifically about the fact that tourism is a absolutely vital industry in Canada. It's one of our largest contributors to GDP. And you talked about the necessity of government to support tourism in order to bring that vital industry back. At a national level, what would you be advocating for, and how would we be doing it?
I think at a national level, if we truly want to make this industry sustainable, I'm just going to go back to what I talked about earlier. there needs to be a transformation in terms of the physical plant of the sector. And
Mhm.
I look at airports, I look at convention centers, I look at hotels and motor coaches, and there's going to need to be government incentives to get to where we need to, particularly when it comes to carbon. So until we actually tackle that issue, our industry will still be vulnerable. From a branding and positioning perspective, I like where Canada's going in terms of its passion brand. We could always argue brand and positioning. All of us as destination leaders, we could argue that till the cow comes home. But I think our industry, which grew up in the 60s, 70s, 80s, and 90s, does need an overhaul in terms of its physical plant. And I think that's going to take some money. And those are some of the challenges. And then the next challenge really is inclusion. We need to make sure that everyone is benefiting across society and that there's deliberate programs in place to help make that happen.
I so appreciate you saying that. I'm going to pass the buck here. One of your peers, heretofore unnamed, lives in BC, does yoga a lot.
Mm-hmm.
He said it really well. We cannot advertise our way out of this crisis. And
No.
in past crises, and I think you remember SARS
Yeah.
2003 in Toronto. In that day and age, in a kind of pre-digital world, it was okay to throw massive amounts of money at tourism advertising. And that seemed to be the path of least resistance. Government stimulated tourism through
Right.
advertising. That's not going to work this time, is it?
No, because that was the days when mass communication and we could impose our brands on the consumer. Those were the days when we all believed just do it, and those big brands, right? This in this day and age, the consumer is too smart. So you have to have an authentic proposition based on the true values of your community. You need to be able to communicate that to those niche segments that will resonate with your proposition, and deliberately attract the customer segments that work best for your community. And that's not everyone, right? So I think the hard part is that we can't advertise out of it because we all know how to do that. The exciting part is that we can build back, and I think our recovery is going to be in concentric rings geographically, right? It's going to be a long time till I'm welcoming guests across the sea, and it could be a long time till we have mass gatherings. So as those concentric rings slowly build out, in each concentric ring, who's our best customer? And how
Mm-hmm.
does it align with the values of our community? And that's our opportunity to focus in on that. And then, we may wake up in 2 or 3 or 4 years after doing a bunch of really good work and have a higher value customer base that is more aligned with the community. And I think that will set us up. Because what I struggled with previously is, as a destination organization, if we do our job right, we maybe touch 15 to 20% of the customers. And there's still all these people that are buying discount packages through various intermediaries. There's still, mass low volume tour business coming in. There's still, low yield, high volume tour business coming in. My apologies. And there's
Mm-hmm.
nothing wrong with that in the old days. But when our citizens are expecting so much more, and we're under higher scrutiny, I think we need to be more deliberate. And that's the opportunity that we have here. And the private sector will do what the private sector will do, and if they can come to an agreement and market the destination and get the room blocks at a certain rate and make a tour series work, that's wonderful. But I think as a destination that sets the brand halo, we need to be truly aspirational and attract the segments that represent the values of our community. Then we're adding value to our citizens and to our elected officials.
Well, I love the term more deliberate, and it's come up so many times in this crisis, in discussions about Barcelona, in discussions about over tourism in Paris, in Bruges. What does deliberate tourism look like? What does it look like to the consumer?
Well, to me, it looks like I'm still on the demand generating side, so it's about segmentation. And
Mm-hmm.
so, both geographic and psychographic and values-based segmentation. Others would argue passions. We're not really a big activities. We're a city. So it's going after the right customers that will do the best or create the best incremental benefit to our community. So that's how I'm looking at it. And that's how we can be deliberate. Deliberate can also be on the supply side. That what we call destination development in terms of working on infrastructure and working on public policy. So when those two things come together through a coherent strategy, I think we can get to a wonderful place.
So the underwriting ripple current of all this, though, is it all happens in a context of digital disruption. And it was interesting. A peer said, we're not in digital disruption. We're disrupted. How's that changed? How's that changed your role over the last 8 years?
Well, I think um, this is going to sound kind of contrary to that, but we put more focus on sales. So I think we can actually, we're still obviously marketing and we still do a lot of work in media and influencer work, and we try to align those values. But if we can go after those groups in terms of meetings and conferences, and I'll throw sports into that as well too, that really elevate our brand. For example, we're going after the Invictus Games. We came number 2 in 2022. We have a good shot at 2024. And that's a very inclusionary event. It's got a great brand halo. It aligns with a lot of our values. And we're also a bit of a military town with a naval base. So we're welcoming, so that type of bid aligns with our values as a community. So if we keep doing a series of those types of things, and then you have other platforms tell your story, I think that is helpful. And so that's one way. And then the other, I think, is just being really deliberate in your digital work, your social work, and there are tools that we can control, such as our blogs and who we host and how we brief them.
So the Invictus Games, I'm sure that it's not lost on Victoria's great grandson that the town that you're hoping to host it in is the namesake of his great grandmother.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, no, that was a great bid, and we didn't win this one because the winning country, Germany, had never hosted it before. But we're told we're in a very strong position for 2024, and so those are the types of opportunities we see to accelerate our brand and drive, of course, that immediate economic impact.
So, think about this for a second. 3 words that you would share and have people put in their mind as they think about a future of tourism in the context of all those other things, alignment, stakeholder engagement, etc., but specifically in the context of building more robust, sustainable destinations. What should we go away thinking about as leaders in the industry, as CEOs, as destination executives and managers?
Well, I think the first thing is it comes back to strategy, and that's an area I'm very comfortable in. Like you have to put this at the center of your strategy. It needs to be planned for. Sustainability and acceptance isn't just going to happen organically. You can't just dream about it at night. Have your feet land on the floor and it's going to happen. I think the other thing we have to understand is that it's a journey. And as I mentioned off the top, I don't proclaim to be an expert in sustainability, but I do proclaim to be on a pretty intense journey, one that's driven by the values of our community. And I don't know if I'll ever get to the end of it because I think we're always going to be striving to improve. And the third piece is that we still need revenue. It still needs to be profitable. We can't toss out core underlying business needs. Otherwise, I won't be in this chair very long, and there'll be someone who's only focused on heads and beds, right? So, it's walking that road together because I truly believe that it is revenue which allows these types of investments to happen. And if you don't have that year-round foundation of revenue, we can't even be having this conversation. And fortunately, for the last 5 or 6 years, we did, and now we need to build that back up again.
Well, Paul, I got to tell you, it's always a pleasure to talk to you. I think you meld a practical approach with a visionary approach, and it's good for the industry. So it's great to talk to you. I will be at the 2021 Impact, virtual or otherwise, and I'm looking forward to it. Thanks so much for being on the show.
Oh, pleasure. Thanks, David. Thanks for the thought-provoking questions. It's always an honor.